I had no idea the man I trusted that night would be standing at the front of my classroom 3 days later. The rain had been falling over Boston since sunset, tapping against the windows of the little coffee shop on Beacon Street while I sat alone with a cold latte and a laptop full of unfinished research. My name is Emma Carter. I was 24, a graduate student, and that night I was supposed to be thinking about my thesis. Instead, I was thinking about how badly my entire week had gone. My presentation had been pushed back. My apartment had a leaking ceiling. My bank account was almost empty. I wanted one quiet hour before going home. Then he walked in. He looked tired, not intimidating. Dark coat, damp hair, a paper cup of coffee in one hand. He glanced around the nearly empty shop before taking the table beside mine. "Long night?" he asked. I looked up. "You have no idea." He smiled. "Same." That was how it started. One ordinary question. One stranger. One conversation that somehow lasted almost 2 hours. We talked about Boston, books, terrible coffee, and the strange pressure of pretending to have your future figured out when you were still trying to understand yourself. He never told me exactly what he did. I never asked. There was something refreshing about talking to someone who knew nothing about my grades, my thesis, or the expectations waiting for me at school. For those 2 hours, I was simply Emma. When the rain finally softened, he stood and checked his watch. "I should let you get home." "Probably." He hesitated. "I am Daniel." I smiled. "Emma. Nice to meet you, Emma." "You too, Daniel." That should have been the end. It almost was. But before he left, he looked back and said, "Sometimes one night is enough to change how you see everything." I laughed because I thought he was being dramatic. I did not understand what he meant. Not yet. The next morning, I woke up convinced the whole thing had been a strange little interruption in my life. By Monday, I had almost forgotten his voice. Then I walked into my graduate seminar. Students were settling into their seats. Laptops opened. Papers shuffled. Someone whispered that our department had hired a new professor. I barely listened. I was still pulling my notebook from my bag when the classroom door opened. He stepped inside. Dark suit. Familiar eyes. The same calm expression from the coffee shop. My stomach dropped. He placed a folder on the desk and looked across the room. For 1 second, his eyes met mine. He stopped, just for a fraction of a second. Then his expression became perfectly professional. "Good morning," he said. "I am Professor Daniel Hayes." My pen slipped from my fingers. He looked down at the attendance sheet, then back at me. "And I believe we have already met." I could barely breathe. Neither of us smiled. Neither of us moved. Then he said the one sentence that made the room feel suddenly too small. "Emma Carter, you are enrolled in my class." The classroom suddenly felt too quiet. I could hear the soft hum of the heating system, the clicking of laptop keys, even the rain against the windows. But all I could focus on was Daniel Hayes standing at the front of the room as if the coffee shop had never happened. "Professor Hayes," I finally said, forcing my voice to sound normal. He gave one small nod. "Emma." Nothing more. He turned toward the board and began explaining the course requirements. His voice was steady, professional, almost annoyingly calm. I stared at my notebook and wrote the date at the top of the page, even though I had already written it twice. My mind kept returning to Saturday night. The coffee shop, the rain, the conversation that had felt so easy because neither of us knew anything about the other. Now I knew everything that mattered. He was my professor. I was his student. And there was no version of the situation that did not come with boundaries. "Before we begin," Daniel said, "I want everyone to understand that this seminar is demanding. I expect preparation, independent thinking, and respectful discussion." His eyes moved across the room without stopping on me. That almost made it worse. He was treating me exactly like everyone else. I should have been relieved. Instead, I felt strangely invisible. When class ended, students gathered around him with questions. I packed my notebook slowly, hoping the room would empty before I had to leave. It did. Almost. Daniel remained behind his desk, organizing papers. I reached the door. "Emma." I stopped. I turned around. His expression had changed slightly. Not personal. Not warm. Serious. "Please stay for a moment." My heart began beating faster. I walked back toward the desk, leaving several feet between us. "About Saturday," he said quietly. I waited. "We cannot discuss what happened in this classroom." "I understand. And outside the classroom, I think it is best that we keep things professional as well." His words were careful, measured. "Of course." He looked down at the papers in front of him. I did not know who you were. I know. If I had known, I would never have allowed the situation to become complicated. The word complicated stung more than I expected. It was not complicated, I said. He looked up. For the first time that morning, the professor disappeared for half a second, and I saw the man from the coffee shop again. That is exactly why it is complicated now. I had no answer. He continued, you deserve to complete this program without anyone questioning your work or your reputation. And what about you? I asked. He paused. I will manage my responsibilities. There was something almost painfully sincere about the answer. I nodded and walked toward the door. Emma. I looked back. For what it is worth, I am glad you are in this program. Then his professional expression returned. Now go home and get some rest. You have a research proposal due next week. I almost smiled. Yes, Professor Hayes. I stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind me. Only then did I let myself breathe. Rachel was waiting near the stairs. She looked at my face and immediately knew something was wrong. You look like you just saw a ghost. I shook my head. Not a ghost. Then what? I glanced back at the closed classroom door. Someone I thought I would never see again. Rachel studied me. Who? I tightened my grip on my notebook. That is the problem. I do not know what he is to me anymore. And from behind the closed door, I heard Daniel quietly turn the lock. The next morning, I arrived at the department 15 minutes early, hoping an empty hallway would make everything feel normal again. It did not. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Rainwater clung to the windows. My shoes sounded too loud against the polished floor. I stopped outside Professor Hayes' classroom and stared at the closed door. For one ridiculous second, I considered turning around. Then I remembered his voice from yesterday. You deserve to complete this program without anyone questioning your work. I took a breath and walked inside. Daniel was already there. He stood beside the whiteboard, reviewing his stack of papers. He looked up. Our eyes met. Nothing happened. No smile. No surprise. Just recognition. Good morning, Emma. Good morning, Professor Hayes. The words felt strange in my mouth. He nodded toward the second row. You can take your usual seat. Usual. I almost laughed. I had been in his class for exactly one day. I sat down and opened my notebook. He began the lecture. Every sentence was measured. Every movement was controlled. He never looked at me longer than he looked at anyone else. In fact, he seemed determined to make sure of it. At first, I thought that would make things easier. Then he returned our first assignment. My paper landed on my desk with a red mark across the top. B-. I stared at it. I had spent 6 hours on that proposal. Daniel walked past without stopping. Questions? He asked the room. My hand went up. He looked directly at me. Yes, Emma. I would like to understand the grade. Come to office hours. The room went quiet for half a second. Then he continued speaking. I wrote nothing for the rest of the lecture. When class ended, students gathered around him, asking about research topics. I waited until the hallway cleared. Then I approached his desk. Professor Hayes. He looked up. Yes. Was the grade fair? Yes. Did Saturday have anything to do with it? His expression changed. Only slightly. No. Then why is it lower than your comments suggest? He closed the folder in front of him. Because your argument was strong, but your evidence was incomplete. I looked at the paper again. He had written 3 detailed notes in the margins. They were fair. More than fair. He had noticed every weakness I had tried to hide. You are being harder on me, I said. I am being your professor. That is not what I meant. He held my gaze for a moment. I know. Silence settled between us. Then he lowered his voice. Emma, there is a line we cannot cross. I knew exactly what he meant. I am not asking you to cross it. Good. His answer came quickly. Too quickly. I picked up my paper. Then we agree. We do. I reached the door. One more thing. I turned around. Daniel looked tired now. Not like Professor Hayes. Like the man from the coffee shop. What? Outside this building, if we happen to see each other, we do not need to pretend we are strangers. I frowned. But we cannot be friends either. He nodded. Correct. So what are we? He looked at me for several seconds before answering. 2 people who met at the wrong time. The sentence followed me into the hallway. I found Rachel near the vending machines. She took one look at my paper. B-. Apparently. That professor is strict. I slipped the paper into my folder. He is. Rachel studied my face. You are thinking about him again. I looked toward the classroom door. I am trying not to. Then the door opened behind me. Daniel stepped into the hallway. He walked past without saying a word. But as he passed, I noticed something on the floor beside his desk. A small paper receipt from the coffee shop on Beacon Street. And written across the back, in his handwriting, were 4 words. I remember that night too. The receipt stayed in my thoughts all afternoon. I told myself it meant nothing. A coffee receipt could mean anything. Maybe Daniel had found it in an old pocket. Maybe he had kept it by accident. Maybe the 4 words were not meant for me at all. But I knew better. I had seen his handwriting. I had heard the quiet hesitation in his voice. I remember that night too. By 6 o'clock, I was sitting in the graduate library, trying to finish my research proposal. The words on my screen blurred together. Every few minutes, my mind returned to that receipt. Finally, I closed my laptop and went downstairs for coffee. The campus cafe was nearly empty. I ordered a black coffee and stood near the window while rain moved across the glass. Then I heard a familiar voice behind me. "You always choose the quietest table." I turned. Daniel stood several feet away, holding a folder. He immediately looked toward the open seating area. "I am sorry. I did not mean to interrupt." "You did not." He nodded. "Good." Then he walked toward the other side of the cafe. No invitation. No private conversation. Just distance. Somehow, that hurt more than I expected. I carried my coffee to a table near the window. A few minutes later, Daniel approached the counter, paid for his drink, and left. I watched through the glass as he crossed the street. Then I noticed something on the table where he had been sitting. A folded piece of paper. I knew I should leave it alone. I also knew I would regret it if I did not. I walked over and picked it up. It was not a personal note. It was a printed department announcement about faculty research assignments. At the bottom was Daniel's name. Beside it was mine. I read the line twice. My thesis project had been selected for a faculty research review. Daniel was one of the professors originally assigned to the review committee. My stomach tightened. If he reviewed my work, people could question the result. If he refused, people might wonder why. Suddenly, the strange distance between us made sense. He had not been avoiding me because he regretted meeting me. He had been trying to protect my academic record. The next morning, I went to the department office. Dr. Michael Reed, the department chair, sat behind his desk reviewing paperwork. "Professor Hayes requested that another faculty member review your thesis materials," he said before I could ask. "Why?" "Conflict of interest." I stared at him. "What conflict?" Dr. Reed looked at me carefully. "That is something you should discuss with Professor Hayes." I left the office with more questions than answers. I found Daniel outside his classroom before the seminar began. "You requested another reviewer." He looked at me. "Yes." "Because of Saturday?" He paused. "Because of what happened before I knew you were my student." "You could have told me." I thought distance was clearer. It was not. His expression softened. "I am sorry." I looked down at the folder in my hands. "I thought you were trying to erase that night." "No," his answer was quiet. "I am trying to make sure that night never damages your future." I finally understood. He was not pushing me away because I meant nothing. He was stepping back because my future mattered more than his feelings. Before I could respond, the classroom door opened. Several students walked in. Daniel straightened, becoming Professor Hayes again. "We should begin." I nodded. "Yes." I took my seat. But this time, the distance between us felt different. It was no longer a wall. It was a boundary he was deliberately protecting. And somehow, that made the question in my mind even harder to ignore. If we could not cross that line, what would happen when I was no longer his student? For the next 2 weeks, Daniel became almost impossible to read. He was fair with everyone, demanding with everyone, and completely professional with me. If anything, he seemed determined to prove that my work would receive no special treatment. I should have appreciated it. Instead, I found myself missing the person from the coffee shop. The man who had laughed at terrible coffee. The man who had listened when I admitted that I was terrified of making the wrong choices. I told myself that missing him was not the same as wanting something from him. Still, the distinction became harder to maintain. One Thursday evening, I stayed late in the library to finish my thesis proposal. When I finally stepped outside, the campus was almost empty. A cold Boston wind moved through the courtyard, and I pulled my coat tighter around me. Then I saw Daniel near the steps of the administration building. He was carrying a folder and talking with Dr. Reed. I slowed down without meaning to. I could not hear the conversation, but I saw Daniel hand over a document. Dr. Reed read it, looked at him, and shook his head. Daniel said something I could not hear. Then they went inside. I should have continued walking. Instead, I waited. 10 minutes later, Daniel came back outside. He noticed me. Immediately. Emma. I was waiting for the library to close. It was not entirely true. He seemed to know that. You should go home. Are you all right? He looked toward the administration building. I am fine. You do not look fine. A faint smile crossed his face. You are becoming very observant. I learned from the best. The smile disappeared. You should not wait around for me. Why? He hesitated. Because people notice things. I looked at him. Are you talking about us? I am talking about anything that could become a problem for you. His answer frustrated me. You keep saying that. Because it is true. Then tell me the truth. He was silent. I stepped closer, still leaving a respectful distance between us. What did you give Dr. Reed? Daniel looked down at the folder in his hand. A request to remove myself from the review committee for your thesis. I already knew he had asked for another reviewer. Why now? Because the committee meets next month. And I do not want anyone questioning your work because of me. I shook my head. You are making decisions about my future without asking me. I am trying to protect it. You cannot protect me from every possible opinion. His expression tightened with concern. No, but I can make sure my position does not create unnecessary doubt. His words landed harder than I expected. So that is it. I asked. You want to make sure I have a clean record, then you disappear? That is what I should do. The answer was immediate. Too immediate. I looked away because my eyes had started to burn. You know what hurts? I whispered. I never asked you to choose me. He said nothing. I only wanted you to stop acting like that night was something you regretted. Daniel's voice became softer. I do not regret meeting you. I looked back at him. Then what do you regret? He took a slow breath. That I met you before I knew how important your future was going to be to me. I could not answer. For a moment, the courtyard was completely silent. Then his phone rang. He glanced at the screen. Dr. Reed. Daniel answered and listened. His expression changed. Understood, he said. He ended the call and looked at me. They approved my request. I felt relief first. Then something unexpected. Sadness. Because the boundary we had been protecting was becoming permanent. Daniel put the phone away. You should finish your thesis, Emma. I nodded. And you should go home. He started walking away. Then he stopped without turning around. For what it is worth, I still remember the coffee. And then he left me standing alone beneath the cold Boston sky, wondering whether protecting my future meant losing the one person who had made me feel understood. For the next month, I did exactly what Daniel told me to do. I finished my thesis proposal. I attended every seminar. I asked questions when I needed answers and kept every conversation with Professor Hayes focused on my work. From the outside, everything looked normal. Inside, I was constantly aware of the space between us. It was strange how quickly a person could become part of your thoughts without being part of your life. Daniel had become that person. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, Dr. Reed called me into his office. Your thesis review has been reassigned, he said. Professor Hayes will have no involvement. I nodded. I understand. He slid a document across the desk. There is another matter. Professor Hayes has requested that you be considered for a departmental research fellowship. I stared at the page. He did what? He recommended your work. My chest tightened. But I thought he was trying to stay away from my academic record. He is. That is why he asked another professor to submit the recommendation on his behalf. I looked down at the document. Daniel had found a way to support me without placing himself in a position of authority over my future. For some reason, that meant more than a direct compliment ever could. Does he know I was accepted? I asked. Dr. Reed smiled. You were accepted this morning. I walked out of the office holding the fellowship letter like it might disappear. I found Daniel in the hallway outside his classroom. He was speaking with another faculty member, so I waited. When he noticed me, he excused himself and walked over. I heard, he said. You heard? Dr. Reed told me the fellowship was approved. I held up the letter. You recommended me. Your work earned it. You still recommended me. He gave a small nod. I believed someone should make sure the committee saw what you had done. I looked at him for a moment. Thank you. You do not owe me anything. I know. He smiled. Good. For the first time in weeks, the conversation felt easy. Almost like the coffee shop. Almost. Then Daniel glanced toward the classroom. Your seminar starts in 10 minutes. I know. Neither of us moved. Finally, I said, Daniel. His expression changed at the sound of his first name. Yes. When this semester ends, will you still be my professor? He understood the question immediately. No. And after that? He looked thoughtful. After that, you will still be a student in the university. My heart sank slightly. Right. But I will not be responsible for your grades, your research evaluation, or your academic progress. I nodded slowly. So there would still be rules. There should always be boundaries when one person has influence over another. His answer was gentle, not dismissive. But someday, Emma, you will graduate. You will build your own career. You will make your own decisions. He paused. And if our paths cross then, those decisions will belong entirely to you. I looked down at my fellowship letter. You really think that far ahead? He smiled. Someone has to. I laughed softly. Then the warning bell sounded from the hallway. Daniel stepped back. You should go. I turned toward the classroom. Professor Hayes? Yes. I still remember that night too. His expression softened. I know. I walked into the seminar with a strange sense of peace. The situation had not become easier. If anything, the future was more uncertain than ever. But for the first time, I understood what Daniel had been protecting. He was not trying to erase what happened. He was making sure that whatever happened next would be chosen freely. And as I opened my notebook, I realized the semester was almost over. Soon, the one boundary neither of us could cross would disappear. But what happened after that would be entirely up to me. The last month of the semester passed faster than I expected. Suddenly, graduation was only 3 weeks away, and every hallway seemed filled with reminders that our lives were about to change. My fellowship had been approved. My thesis was almost finished. And Daniel remained exactly what he had promised to be. My professor, nothing more. He never crossed the line. Neither did I. Still, there were moments when the silence between us seemed to carry everything we refused to say. One afternoon, after our final seminar presentation, Daniel returned my thesis draft. His comments covered nearly every page. At the top, he had written one sentence. You are ready for what comes next. I stared at it longer than I should have. When the classroom emptied, I approached his desk. Professor Hayes. He looked up. Yes, Emma. I held up the paper. Is this your way of saying I am finally finished? A small smile appeared. It is my way of saying you did the work. You sound proud. I am. The answer was simple. No hesitation. Somehow, that made my heart beat faster than anything else could have. I sat across from him, leaving the familiar distance between us. Do you remember what you said at the coffee shop? He thought for a moment. I said a lot that night. You said sometimes one night is enough to change how you see everything. His expression softened. I remember. I did not understand it then. Do you understand it now? I looked down at my thesis. I think so. He waited. That night did not change my life because of what happened between us. It changed my life because I finally said things I had been too afraid to admit. Daniel nodded slowly. That is a better reason. I smiled. You always have to make everything sound like a lesson. Occupational hazard. We both laughed. Then the laughter faded, and the room became quiet again. When I graduate, I said, you will not be my professor anymore. Correct. And I will not be in your department after the fellowship begins. Correct. So what happens then? Daniel looked at me carefully. That is your decision. His answer surprised me. Not yours. No, he closed the folder on his desk. I have spent this entire semester making. Sure, your choices remain yours. I am not going to change that now. I nodded, feeling both relieved and nervous. Then I think I know what I want. His eyes stayed on mine. You do not have to tell me today. I know. I stood and gathered my papers. But I might tell you after graduation. A quiet smile appeared on his face. Then I will listen. I walked toward the door. Before I left, I turned around. Daniel. He looked up. Thank you for never making me choose between my future and my feelings. His expression became serious. Your future should never have been the price of either. I stepped into the hallway. Rachel was waiting near the stairs. She immediately noticed my expression. Something happened. I smiled. Not yet. What does that mean? I looked back at the classroom door. It means something might happen soon. That evening, I opened my calendar and circled graduation day. For months, the boundary between Daniel and me had felt like a locked door. Now, for the first time, I could see the date when I would finally walk through it. But there was one thing I still did not know. When that day came, would Daniel still want to know me when he no longer had to be my professor? Graduation morning arrived beneath a clear Boston sky. almost as if the city had decided to give me one perfect day before everything changed. I stood in my apartment doorway holding my graduation gown, staring at it longer than necessary. For months, I had imagined this moment as an ending. Now it felt more like a question. By noon, the university courtyard was filled with families, photographs, flowers, and students trying to memorize every last detail. Rachel hugged me so tightly that I almost dropped my diploma folder. "You did it," she said. I laughed. "We did it." She pulled back and studied my face. "Are you looking for someone?" I glanced across the courtyard before I could stop myself. "Maybe." Rachel smiled. "He is not your professor anymore." I looked at her. "I know. Then what are you waiting for?" I did not have an answer. The ceremony passed in a blur. Names were called. Cameras flashed. Families cheered. When my name echoed through the auditorium, I walked across the stage with a strange calmness. I had spent months wondering whether my feelings would distract me from my future. Instead, they had forced me to understand what I wanted from it. After the ceremony, I returned to the department one last time to collect my things. The hallway was almost empty. My old classroom door stood open. Daniel was inside, gathering his papers from the desk. He looked up when I entered. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he smiled. Not the careful smile of Professor Hayes. The quiet one I remembered from the coffee shop. "Congratulations, Emma." I held up my diploma folder. "Thank you. You should be proud." "I am." He nodded. "Good." I placed my folder on the desk. "So this is it." He looked around the classroom. "Your last day?" "Your last day being my professor." He smiled. "That too." I took a breath. "I wanted to ask you something." "All right. Now that I am graduating and you are no longer responsible for my academic work, would you still want to know me?" His expression became completely still. Then he stood and walked no closer than necessary. "Emma, I have wanted to know you since that night." My heart tightened. "Then why did you make it so difficult?" "Because wanting something and having the right to pursue it are not the same thing." I nodded slowly. "And now? Now the decision is yours." I smiled. "Then I am making it." He waited. "I would like to know you too." For the first time, there was no professional distance hidden behind his expression. There was only relief. "Would you like to get coffee?" he asked. I laughed softly. "That sounds familiar." I was hoping it would. We walked out of the classroom together, leaving the door open behind us. Outside, the afternoon was warm, and students were still celebrating across the campus. Nothing dramatic happened. No grand promise. No impossible declaration. Just two adults finally standing on equal ground. At the corner of the street, Daniel glanced at me. "There is something I should tell you." "What?" "I still remember what you ordered that night." I smiled. "You remember my coffee?" "I remember everything." We continued walking toward the cafe where our story had begun. This time, there was no secrecy, no classroom, and no boundary telling us what we could not say. There was simply a choice. Mine. His. Ours, if we both wanted it. And as the familiar sound of rain began softly against the cafe windows, I realized the night I once thought was a mistake had given me something I never expected. The courage to choose my own future, and the freedom to discover what could happen after the rules were gone. The cafe looked exactly the same, but everything felt different. The rain tapped softly against the windows, the lights reflected across the polished tables, and the smell of fresh coffee filled the room. Yet this time, I was not sitting across from a stranger, and Daniel was not wondering whether he had crossed a line. We chose the same table near the window where we had first talked. For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. Then Daniel smiled. "This feels familiar." "It does." "Are you nervous?" I laughed softly. "A little." "Me too." That answer surprised me. Professor Hayes had always seemed certain. Daniel did not. He looked like the man I had met that first night, the one who had admitted that he did not always know what came next. I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup. I spent months wondering if what happened between us meant something. He looked at me carefully. "It meant something to me. Even when you kept your distance?" "Especially then." He paused. Distance gave me time to understand the difference between wanting someone and respecting their choices. I looked toward the rain-covered window. "And what do you want now?" Daniel smiled. "I want to know you without a classroom between us." My heart felt strangely light. "Then ask me something." "All right." He thought for a moment. "What do you want your life to look like 5 years from now?" I smiled. "That is your first question?" "I am still a professor at heart." "Former professor." "Fair enough. I considered the question. I want to finish my research. I want to write. Maybe teach someday. I want to travel. I want a life that feels like mine. He nodded. That sounds good. What about you? I want to keep teaching. I want to write another book. And I want to stop pretending that having everything planned is the same as being happy. I smiled. That sounds familiar. We talked until our coffee was cold. We talked about books, family, Boston, terrible weather, and the strange paths that had brought us to that table. Nothing felt rushed. Nothing felt forbidden. There was no secret to protect. No academic record to worry about. No power imbalance defining every word. Just two adults learning who the other person really was. When we finally stepped outside, the rain had stopped. The streets reflected the city lights, and the air smelled clean. Daniel looked at me. Can I walk you home? I smiled. You can. We walked slowly beneath the evening sky. At my building, we stopped near the entrance. Neither of us seemed ready to say goodbye. Daniel looked at me with the same expression he had worn in the coffee shop months earlier, except now there was no uncertainty hiding behind it. I am glad you came that night, he said. Me too, even knowing where it would lead. I thought about the awkward mornings, the careful conversations, the boundaries, the doubts, and everything I had learned about myself. Then I smiled, especially because of where it led. He nodded. Good night, Emma. Good night, Daniel. I watched him walk away, then looked up at the clear sky above Boston. I had once believed that one unexpected night had changed my life. I was wrong. It had only opened a door. The real change happened afterward, when I learned that love could never be worth sacrificing my future, my choices, or my independence. Daniel had understood that before I did. He had stepped back when stepping closer would have been easier. And because he respected the boundary, when the boundary finally disappeared, I was free to choose what came next. I went upstairs, set my diploma beside my fellowship letter, and looked at them both. They were proof that my future had never belonged to anyone else. Not even him. And somehow, knowing that made the possibility of choosing him feel more meaningful than any promise ever could. Sometimes the right person does not ask you to abandon your future. Sometimes the right person stands far enough away to let you build it, then waits to see whether you will choose to walk back toward them.